She grew up in a small town where life moved slowly and quietly. The streets were narrow, lined with old houses that had wooden doors and windows with chipped paint. Everyone knew everyone, and nothing much ever seemed to change. She lived in a modest house at the edge of town, a place that was neither big nor fancy, but it was filled with warmth. Her family didn't have much money, but they had each other. There was laughter in the evenings when her parents would tell stories about their childhood, and there was always a small garden behind the house where flowers grew in a disorderly, wild way. That little garden seemed like magic to her sometimes, with its bright colors and buzzing bees. From a very young age, she had a curiosity about sounds and music. It wasn't something anyone had pushed her toward. Her parents were hardworking people. Her father fixed machines and small tools for neighbors, and her mother spent long hours cleaning houses in town. Money was tight and expensive lessons were impossible. Still, she was drawn to melodies as if they were calling her. She would hum songs she had heard on the radio or on the occasional TV show, and sometimes she would clap her hands to create rhythms. Other children played with toys or ran outside, but she would sit quietly, listening, imagining sounds she could make herself. One day, while walking home from school, she noticed a small thrift store tucked between two larger shops. Its windows were dusty, and old items were stacked inside in no particular order. Something about the store always caught her attention, and on that day she decided to go inside. Among piles of old books, broken chairs, and forgotten clothes, she saw a piano in the corner. It was not a beautiful piano. The wood was scratched, the keys were uneven, and some of them were yellowed with age. But it seemed to call to her. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys. Even though it sounded strange, slightly off, she felt a thrill in her heart. She had to have it. She convinced her parents to let her bring it home. They didn't have much choice in saying no because they could see how much she wanted it, and secretly they were proud of her determination. Moving the piano into their small living room was a challenge. It barely fit through the door, and she had to push and pull it while her father held one end. Finally, it settled into a corner, and she had her own little space where she could sit and practice. She didn't know how to play properly. She didn't know notes or scales or anything formal, but she had something stronger, curiosity and passion. Every day after school, she would sit at the piano. At first, it was just random notes, clumsy and uneven. Sometimes she would get frustrated because her fingers couldn't do what she imagined in her mind. Some days she would bang the keys so hard that her small hands would hurt. But slowly she began to notice patterns. Certain combinations of notes sounded nice together. She tried to remember songs she had heard on the radio or on TV, and she would mimic them as best as she could. Sometimes she made up her own little tunes, messy but filled with emotion. The piano became her best friend, a place where she could express everything she felt. Neighbors started noticing her. Some would stop by the fence and listen as she played. At first they thought it was just the sounds of a child experimenting. But soon they were impressed. Even though she was learning on her own without a teacher or proper guidance, there was something unique about the way she played. It was full of life and feeling. They whispered among themselves, "That girl has a gift," though they didn't know the depth of it. She didn't play for them, though. She played for herself. Each note was a step into a world where nothing else mattered. No worries about school, no thoughts of money, no cares about the future. Her parents were cautious at first. They wanted her to focus on her studies to prepare for a stable life. But when they heard her play even just a few notes, they realized she was discovering something extraordinary. Her mother would sometimes stop her cleaning to listen, quietly smiling while her father would lean against the wall, shaking his head in disbelief. Where did she learn that? He would ask neighbors when they complimented her, but the answer was simple. She learned it herself with determination and love for the music. She would spend hours with the piano, often late into the night. Sometimes her small hands would ache. Sometimes she would get discouraged when a song sounded wrong, but she refused to give up. She learned patience not from a teacher, but from her own persistence. Every mistake was a lesson. Every wrong note was an opportunity to try again. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and slowly, the girl who once only hummed to herself was creating music that could make others stop and listen. She didn't have many friends who understood her passion. Many of the children in town were more interested in sports or games. They would laugh at her sometimes, calling her obsession with the piano strange. But she didn't care. She had found a voice in the keys, a way to speak without words. She felt powerful, not because of applause or praise, but because she was doing something that no one could take away from her. Music had become her world, and in that world she was free. The piano also taught her discipline. She began to set routines, practicing certain sequences, repeating them until her fingers knew exactly what to do. Her small living room became a place of focus and quiet determination. The neighbors who stopped to listen could see the change in her, the way she would close her eyes and let the music guide her. Sometimes they would hear the melodies drifting into the streets and they would smile, thinking of how lucky they were to hear such beauty in an unexpected place. One afternoon, a music teacher from the neighboring town came passing through. He was looking for a quiet place to rest and heard her playing. At first, he thought it was just a local child experimenting. But as he listened, he was stunned. There was something natural, almost magical about the way she moved her fingers across the keys. He stayed until she finished, and when she noticed him, she felt embarrassed, unsure of what to say. But the teacher smiled warmly and told her parents, "She has real talent. You must support her." That small encouragement stayed with her, though she didn't fully understand it yet. Even though her world was small and her resources limited, she began dreaming bigger. She imagined herself on a stage, playing to a large audience, sharing the music she had created from her tiny living room. She imagined traveling, learning, and improving. But she didn't rush. She focused on her small steps, on her daily practice, on discovering new melodies. Every day was a chance to get closer to the music she loved. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a source of joy. It had taught her patience, discipline, and confidence. It had shown her that even in a world that often felt limited and small, there was space for something beautiful to grow. And for the girl who spent hours alone in a little living room, that beauty was her own hands, her own imagination, and her own courage. As she grew, so did her talent. The melodies became more complex, the rhythm sharper, and her understanding of music deeper. But she never lost the joy of the first day she touched the keys. That simple excitement, that sense of wonder at creating something new stayed with her. It was what pushed her to keep practicing, keep learning, and keep dreaming, even when others doubted her. Her story in this small town was just beginning. The humble beginnings, the broken piano, and the quiet determination were laying the foundation for something extraordinary. She didn't know it yet, but the world outside her little town would soon hear her music. And when it did, it would be impossible to ignore the girl who had started with nothing but curiosity, passion, and a piano in a small corner of her home. Life in her small town carried on in its usual quiet way, but for her, every day was filled with a growing excitement. She spent hours at the piano, learning more complicated melodies, pushing herself to do what she had never thought possible. Each new tune felt like a step forward, and each small success filled her with pride. But she didn't realize that her journey was about to reach a new level, one that would test her patience, her determination, and her courage in ways she had never experienced before. One afternoon, while she was walking home from school, she noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board outside the local library. The paper was bright, catching her eye immediately. She walked closer and read the words carefully. It was an announcement for a regional music competition that would be held in the nearby town. The competition promised a small prize for the winner, but more importantly, it offered recognition and the opportunity to play in front of a large audience and respected judges. Her heart started beating faster as she read the details. The flyer mentioned that participants were required to perform a specific piece, known for being one of the hardest piano compositions in the world. Many students in her school had already seen the flyer and whispered about it among themselves. Most of them laughed, saying the piece was impossible for someone without formal training. Some even said she shouldn't bother trying, that it was meant for professional musicians or students who had years of lessons. But when she read the words and saw the notes in her mind, she felt something different. She didn't feel fear or doubt. She felt a spark, a challenge she was ready to meet. The idea of playing that difficult piece made her pulse quicken, not with worry, but with excitement. She went home that evening and sat at her piano, the flyer on the small table beside her. She could hardly sleep that night, thinking about the music, imagining how it would feel to play those complex notes, to create something so beautiful and challenging with her own hands. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She didn't have a teacher, she didn't have experience in competitions, and she didn't even fully understand the technical parts of the music yet. But she also knew that she loved music more than anything else. If there was a chance to try even a small one, she had to take it. The next morning, she told her parents about the competition. Her mother frowned slightly, worried about the time and effort it would take. Her father looked concerned too, thinking about schoolwork and the pressure of such a difficult challenge. They reminded her that it was not easy and that many people would fail, but she looked at them with steady eyes, explaining that she didn't want to play for a prize or applause but for the music itself, and for the chance to see how far she could go. Her parents hesitated, but they could see the determination in her face. In the end, they agreed to let her try, though they still worried about the stress it might bring. Once she was committed, she threw herself into practice with an intensity that surprised even her. The piece was full of fast passages, complicated rhythms, and leaps that seemed almost impossible to manage. At first, she could barely get through a single section without making mistakes. She would play a line over and over, her fingers tripping on the notes, her heart sinking with every error. Sometimes she felt frustrated and wanted to give up. But she always reminded herself why she had started. She reminded herself that the music mattered more than anything else. Each mistake was not a failure. It was a step toward learning, a lesson she needed to master the piece. She started to break the music down into small sections. One part at a time, she would focus on mastering a few bars before moving on. She would repeat the same section dozens of times until her fingers felt natural and confident. She listened to recordings of the piece over and over, trying to understand the tempo, the emotion, and the subtle changes that made it so difficult. She even recorded herself on her small phone and listened carefully, comparing her playing to the recordings. Each day, she could feel herself improving little by little. Her dedication caught the attention of the neighbors. Some of them would stop by to listen to the music flowing from her home. At first, they were amazed at how a young girl could spend hours on such a difficult piece without a teacher. Then they started noticing the improvement. Each day she seemed more confident, more precise, more expressive. People whispered about her talent, wondering how she could develop such skill on her own. But she didn't play for them. She played for herself and for the music she loved so deeply. Despite her focus, she still faced challenges. Some days her fingers ached, and her mind felt tired from the constant practice. She would have to take breaks and remind herself to be patient. There were moments when she felt the fear of failure creeping in. The competition was just around the corner, and the piece seemed almost impossible. She would close her eyes and imagine stepping onto the stage, facing the judges and audience. In those moments, she would feel a wave of nervousness wash over her, but then she would remind herself of all the hours she had already put in. She was ready, even if she didn't fully believe it yet. To strengthen herself further, she began to study the music theory behind the piece. She didn't have a teacher to explain things, so she relied on books and online tutorials. She learned about key signatures, rhythms, and dynamics, applying them to her practice. She realized that understanding the structure of the music helped her play more confidently. Every new concept she learned made her feel more prepared. She began to see that determination and intelligence could help her overcome the lack of formal lessons. She was learning to rely on herself, and that gave her a new kind of confidence. Her friends were curious about her intense practice. Some admired her dedication, while others thought she was working too hard. They would ask her why she was spending so much time on a single piece, and she would simply smile and say, "Because I want to see what I can do." She didn't need anyone else to understand. She knew this journey was hers alone, and it was about more than just winning a competition. It was about testing her limits, pushing herself to a level she had never reached before. As the days passed, she began to feel the music becoming a part of her. She could see the notes in her mind before her fingers even touched the keys. She started to imagine the emotions she wanted to express, the excitement, the tension, the beauty hidden in every chord. The piece was no longer just notes on a page. It was alive, and she was becoming one with it. The harder sections, once intimidating, started to feel like challenges she could meet. Her confidence grew, and she began to feel excitement instead of fear. Her parents watched this transformation with quiet pride. They could see her focus, her determination, and the joy she felt while playing. They didn't fully understand the technical details, but they understood what it meant for her. Music was not just a hobby. It was her way of growing, of expressing herself, of finding purpose in the world. They started making small sacrifices to help her practice. clearing time in the evenings and providing a quiet space where she could focus without interruptions. It was a team effort in its own quiet way, and it made her feel supported even more. Finally, the day arrived when she had to register for the competition. She walked to the town hall, flyer in hand, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. The people there were polite but formal, and she could see the seriousness of the event. She was just a young girl from a small town, and many of the other participants had teachers, experience, and expensive instruments. She felt a small moment of doubt creep in, but then she remembered all the months she had spent preparing, all the mistakes she had overcome, and all the hours she had devoted to the music. She took a deep breath and signed her name. She was in. Walking home that evening, she felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. The piece was still difficult, still intimidating, but now it had a new meaning. It was not just a challenge. It was a journey she had already started, a journey that would test her courage, patience, and heart. She knew the road ahead would be long, filled with mistakes and struggles, but she also knew she was ready to face it. Her passion for music had become stronger than fear. She spent the next weeks in a rhythm of study, practice, and reflection. Every day she felt herself growing, learning more about the piece and about herself. Her fingers became stronger and more agile, her understanding of the music deeper and her confidence more solid. She could see the progress she was making, and that progress filled her with hope. The harder she worked, the more she realized that the real reward was not just winning the competition, but discovering how far she could go when she believed in herself. By the time the competition was only a few days away, she was ready. Her nerves were still present, but they were accompanied by excitement and a quiet confidence. She had done everything she could to prepare. She had faced the hardest parts of the piece and practiced until she could play them almost perfectly. She had overcome doubt, fatigue, and fear, and now she was ready to see what she could achieve. The days leading up to the competition were filled with both excitement and tension. She practiced tirelessly, her small fingers flying over the keys, moving through difficult sections again and again. Every note had to be perfect, every rhythm precise, and every pause measured. Despite all the preparation, a quiet fear began to creep into her heart. What if she made a mistake in front of the judges? What if all her practice wasn't enough? These thoughts weighed on her, but she refused to let them stop her. Her parents noticed the change. She would sometimes sit at the piano, staring at the keys without playing, lost in her own thoughts. Her mother would gently place a hand on her shoulder, asking if she was all right. "I'm fine," she would say with a forced smile, though her heart was racing. Her father would watch from across the room, quietly wishing he could take away the pressure she was feeling. They knew how much this meant to her, but they also understood that this was a test of more than just skill. It was a test of courage. The town itself seemed to sense her growing tension. Neighbors who had once paused to listen to her music would now offer words of encouragement. "You've worked so hard," they would say. "Just do your best and that will be enough." Some even offered to help her with small things like carrying her music sheets or giving her quiet space to practice. Their support, though small, meant a lot. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that even in a small town people could recognize talent and dedication. As the competition approached, she began to imagine the scene in her mind. The hall would be large, filled with people who were more experienced and confident than she was. The judges would be serious, with trained eyes and critical ears. Other competitors would have practiced under teachers, with expensive instruments and years of formal training. She felt a wave of doubt wash over her. Could she really compete with them? Could she even survive the pressure of being watched so closely? To calm herself, she focused on the music. She told herself that the notes on the page were not enemies. They were friends guiding her. She practiced visualizing each section, imagining her fingers moving smoothly, each chord resonating with emotion. She would close her eyes and play in her mind, hearing the music as if she were already on stage. It was difficult at first, but slowly it gave her a sense of control. Even when fear crept in, she could counter it with preparation and imagination. Despite her efforts, the doubts were not easy to shake. On some nights, she would lie awake thinking about the judges, the audience, and the possibility of failure. She remembered the whispers from schoolmates who said she couldn't do it. She remembered the long hours of practice, the sore fingers, the moments when she wanted to give up. But then she would remind herself of how far she had come. She had learned the piece on her own, Without a teacher, without formal lessons, if she had come this far, surely she could take the next step. Her friends noticed her mood as well. They could see the tension in her movements, the way she would sometimes lose focus in conversation. Some of them tried to offer advice or distractions, but she gently declined. This was her journey, and she needed to walk it in her own way. She started spending more time alone with her music, practicing, imagining, and preparing herself mentally. Each day she became stronger, not just in skill, but in confidence. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. The night before the competition, she stayed at the piano late into the evening. Her hands were tired, her mind weary, but she kept going, playing sections over and over until they became second nature. She stopped occasionally to breathe deeply, letting the music flow through her without forcing it. She wanted to be ready not just technically, but emotionally. She wanted to connect with the music in a way that could touch others, even those who didn't know her story. That connection, she realized, was more important than perfection. Her parents watched quietly, a mix of awe and concern on their faces. They had never seen her so focused, so determined, so completely absorbed in something she loved. They knew that whatever happened tomorrow, she had already achieved something remarkable. The courage to pursue her passion, to face a challenge that seemed almost impossible, was more than most people could muster. They offered small words of encouragement, telling her to rest, to eat, and to trust herself. She nodded, trying to take their advice, but she couldn't stop thinking about the stage, the audience, and the piece she had worked so hard to master. The next morning, she woke early, her heart racing with anticipation. She dressed carefully, making sure she felt comfortable yet confident. Breakfast was quiet, her parents offering soft smiles and gentle encouragement. Every bite she took seemed to remind her of the long journey that had led to this day. The hours of practice, the sacrifices, the frustration, the small victories. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement, a sense that something important was about to happen. When they arrived at the competition hall, she was struck by its size and grandeur. The stage was large, with polished wooden floors that reflected the light. The audience seats stretched far back, and the piano itself looked grand and intimidating. She felt a moment of panic, imagining herself making a mistake, imagining the judges frowning at her playing. But then she took a deep breath and reminded herself of all the preparation she had done. She reminded herself that she knew the music, that she had practiced tirelessly, and that she loved it with all her heart. Backstage, she saw the other competitors. They were older, more confident, and some even had teachers helping them with last-minute adjustments. She felt a pang of doubt, wondering if she belonged here at all. But then she looked at her hands, remembering all the hours she had spent learning, struggling, and mastering the piece. She realized that courage wasn't about comparing herself to others. It was about doing her best, regardless of who she was up against. That thought gave her a small but powerful boost of confidence. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The audience fell silent as she approached the piano. She took her seat, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music fill her mind. She thought about the first time she had touched a piano in her small living room, about the hours she had practiced alone, about every mistake and every small victory. She realized that every step of her journey had led to this moment. Then she began to play. At first, her fingers moved carefully, testing the piano, feeling its response. Slowly, the music started to flow, and she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The difficult passages, which had once seemed impossible, began to feel natural. She remembered the patterns, the rhythms, and the emotion behind each note. She played not to impress, but to express, to tell the story of her journey, to share her love for the music with everyone in the hall. The audience leaned forward, intrigued by the skill and emotion in her playing. The judges exchanged glances, noting her precision and the passion behind each note. She could feel their eyes on her, but instead of fear, she felt a quiet determination. She reminded herself that she had prepared for this, that she had earned this opportunity, and that the music was hers to share. With each chord, she grew more confident, more expressive, more in tune with the piece. By the time she finished, the hall was silent. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, as if the audience needed time to process what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, applause began to fill the space. It started quietly, then grew louder until it became a thunderous wave of appreciation. She looked up, tears welling in her eyes, and realized that she had not only played the piece, but she had connected with everyone in the room. Every worry, every doubt, every fear had been transformed into music that touched hearts. Backstage, her parents embraced her, their eyes shining with pride. They had seen her struggle, her dedication, and her courage, and now they were witnessing the result. She had faced the hardest challenge she had ever known, and she had done it with grace and determination. Her friends and neighbors who had come to support her cheered and congratulated her. The recognition was overwhelming, but she knew that the real reward was deeper, the knowledge that she had pushed herself beyond what she thought possible. That day marked a turning point in her journey. She realized that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and belief in oneself were equally important. She learned that fear could be transformed into strength, and that challenges, no matter how difficult, could be overcome with dedication. Her performance had been more than just a competition. It had been a testament to her spirit, her passion, and her love for music. The weeks after her first competition were filled with excitement, pride, and a new kind of curiosity. People in her town had begun to notice her in a way they never had before. Some neighbors would stop her on the street to compliment her playing, while teachers at school began to watch her more closely, impressed by her dedication. But she didn't let the attention distract her. She knew that her journey with music was only beginning. The first competition had shown her that she could face challenges, but now there were even bigger ones waiting. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to perform at a regional showcase for young musicians. The showcase was held in a larger city, and it would include some of the most talented young performers from across the region. The piece she would be asked to play was even more demanding than before, with fast passages, intricate rhythms, and complex emotion woven into every measure. For a moment, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. This was a bigger stage, a larger audience, and more experienced musicians. She sat down at her piano at home, the invitation letter beside her, and thought about what she had accomplished so far. She remembered the small living room where she had first practiced on the old, slightly broken piano. She remembered the long nights of trying and failing, of pressing her fingers against sore keys, and slowly discovering the patterns that made the music flow. She realized that if she had been able to overcome those challenges, she could face this new one as well. Her fear was strong, but her determination was stronger. Her parents were proud but cautious. They knew this opportunity could be life-changing, but they also understood that the pressure might be intense. Her mother encouraged her to rest and take care of herself, reminding her that music should always bring joy, not just stress. Her father offered practical support, helping her plan trips and manage her time. Their support, both emotional and practical, made her feel grounded and confident. She knew she wasn't alone, even as the challenge ahead seemed enormous. She began her preparation immediately. Unlike before, this piece required not just technical skill, but deep emotion. She had to make the music speak, to tell a story that could reach the audience's hearts. Each day she practiced for hours, sometimes late into the night. She would repeat the most difficult sections over and over, until her fingers moved without hesitation. She would slow down other parts, focusing on precision and control, making sure that every note was perfect. Her small living room once again became a place of quiet concentration, filled with the sound of music and the rhythm of determination. At first, she felt intimidated. The piece was unlike anything she had attempted before. The fast sections made her fingers ache, and some chords seemed impossible to play cleanly. She made mistakes that frustrated her, moments where she wanted to give up and tell herself it was too hard. But each time she stumbled, she reminded herself of all the times she had succeeded before, all the hours she had spent learning, and all the moments she had refused to quit. Slowly, she began to see that the difficulty was not a wall, but a path forward, a chance to grow stronger. She also began to pay attention to the emotion behind the music. The piece demanded more than speed and accuracy. It required sensitivity, subtlety, and a connection with the listener. She learned to let the music flow through her, to imagine the story behind each passage. Some parts were dramatic and intense, others soft and tender. She closed her eyes while practicing, imagining a crowd in front of her, feeling the music with every chord. By connecting emotionally with the piece, she felt herself improving not only technically, but also as an artist. The closer the showcase came, The more she realized that this performance would test everything she had learned. The audience would be larger and more critical, the judges more experienced, and the stakes higher. She couldn't rely only on technique. She had to bring her heart and her story to the stage. The pressure was immense, but she used it to fuel her preparation. Every day she pushed herself a little further, learning new ways to express herself, discovering the depth of the music, and refining her interpretation. Her parents and neighbors continued to support her, offering quiet encouragement and practical help. They would listen to her practice, offering praise when she did well, and gentle guidance when she struggled. Their presence reminded her that she wasn't alone in her journey, that the people who cared about her wanted to see her succeed. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for their support, and it gave her the courage to keep moving forward. On the morning of the showcase, she woke early, her heart beating fast with anticipation. She dressed carefully, wanting to feel confident and comfortable. Breakfast was quiet, a shared moment of calm before the storm. Her parents offered soft encouragement, telling her to trust herself and enjoy the experience. She nodded, trying to calm her nerves, but she couldn't stop thinking about the stage, the audience, and the piece she had worked so hard to master. When she arrived at the venue, she was struck by its size and grandeur. The stage was elevated, polished and gleaming under the bright lights. The audience seats stretched far back, and the piano itself looked impressive, almost intimidating. She felt a moment of panic, imagining mistakes and missteps, imagining the audience noticing them. But she quickly reminded herself that she had prepared for this moment, that she had earned this opportunity, and that the music was hers to share. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Backstage, she saw other young musicians preparing. Some were older, more experienced, and seemed confident in a way that made her nervous. But she reminded herself that each performer had their own journey, and she had her own. Her preparation, her determination, and her love for music had brought her to this moment. She was ready to do her best, and she was determined to let the music speak for her. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The audience fell silent as she approached the piano. She took her seat, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music fill her mind. She remembered the first time she had played a piano in her living room, the hours of practice, the mistakes, and the small victories. Every step had led to this moment. As she began to play, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. The first notes were precise, clear, and full of expression. Slowly, she let the music flow, feeling each chord, each rhythm, and each melody. The difficult passages, once intimidating, became manageable through her focus and determination. She played with emotion, letting the music tell the story she had imagined. The audience leaned forward, captivated by her skill and the feeling in her performance. The judges watched closely, noting her accuracy, her timing, and the passion she brought to the piece. She could feel their attention, but instead of fear, it motivated her. She reminded herself that she was not playing to impress them, but to share the music, to communicate something deeper than words. With every note, she grew more confident, more expressive, and more connected to the piece. By the end of her performance, the hall was silent. For a moment, it seemed as if everyone was holding their breath, trying to process what they had just heard. Then slowly applause began, soft at first and then growing louder and louder. She looked up, tears welling in her eyes, and realized that she had done more than play the piece. She had connected with the audience. Every effort, every hour of practice, and every challenge she had overcome had led to this moment. Backstage, her parents embraced her, proud and emotional. They had watched her grow, struggle, and persevere, and now they were witnessing the result. The applause continued, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced a bigger challenge, a more demanding audience, and a more difficult piece, and she had succeeded. But more than that, she had grown as a musician and as a person. That day taught her important lessons about courage, perseverance, and self-belief. Talent alone was not enough. It required determination, focus, and a willingness to face fear. She learned that mistakes were part of the journey, and that every challenge was an opportunity to grow. Her performance had not only demonstrated her skill, but it also revealed her heart, her passion, and her commitment. Walking home that evening, she reflected on the journey so far. From the small living room with a broken piano to a stage in a grand hall, she had traveled a path filled with hard work, dedication, and love for music. She knew that even bigger challenges awaited, but she felt ready. She had learned that fear could be transformed into strength, that obstacles could be overcome with patience and determination, and that music had the power to connect people in ways nothing else could. As she prepared for the next stage of her journey, she carried these lessons with her. Every note she played, every challenge she faced was a chance to grow, to express herself, and to inspire others. She understood that the journey was just as important as the destination, and that her love for music would guide her through whatever came next. The day of the big performance finally arrived. She woke up early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. She dressed carefully, making sure she felt comfortable yet confident. Her parents offered quiet encouragement over breakfast, reminding her to trust herself and to enjoy the music. She nodded, trying to calm her nerves, but her mind kept drifting to the stage, the audience, and the piece she had worked so hard to master. Every hour of preparation, every mistake, every late night of practice had led to this moment. When they arrived at the venue, she was awestruck. The hall was immense, with rows upon rows of seats stretching far back, glinting under the bright stage lights. The piano on stage was polished and grand, its black and white keys gleaming. She felt a pang of fear as she imagined herself playing in front of so many people. What if she made a mistake? What if her fingers faltered? What if the judges and audience noticed? But she quickly reminded herself of everything she had accomplished so far. She had overcome countless challenges, and this was just another one to face. Backstage, she saw other young musicians preparing. They seemed calm and confident, some even talking quietly to their teachers or friends. She felt a twinge of doubt, wondering if she really belonged here among such talented performers. But then she thought about the hours she had spent learning the music on her own, the dedication and love she had poured into every practice session. She realized that she didn't need to compare herself to anyone else. She just needed to focus on her music and give it everything she had. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The audience fell silent. All eyes were on her as she approached the piano. She felt the weight of their gaze, but instead of fear, it strengthened her resolve. She took a deep breath, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music fill her mind and heart. She thought about the first time she had played a piano in her small living room, about the long nights of practice, the mistakes, and the small victories that had brought her here. Every step had prepared her for this moment. Then she began to play. The first notes were careful but confident, each one resonating clearly through the hall. Slowly, she let the music flow, her fingers moving across the keys with precision and grace. The difficult passages, which had once seemed impossible, now felt natural under her touch. She was not just playing notes. She was telling a story, expressing emotions that went beyond words. Every chord, every pause, every shift in tempo carried meaning. The music was alive, and she was bringing it to life for everyone in the room. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the skill and emotion in her performance. She could see people holding their breath, watching her hands move with awe. Some faces were serious, others surprised, and a few had tears glistening in their eyes. She had never played for such a large and attentive crowd before, but she felt connected to them through the music. Each note she played seemed to bridge the distance between the stage and the audience, drawing them into her world, into the story she was telling through sound. The judges watched intently, taking notes, their expressions serious. But as the piece continued, she could feel a subtle shift. Their posture relaxed slightly, their eyes widened with appreciation. They could see her skill, her precision, and the passion she poured into every note. She could feel their recognition, but she didn't play for them. She played for the music itself, letting it guide her, letting it carry her across the difficult sections she had once feared. The faster sections of the piece came next, and her fingers moved with lightning speed, yet every note was clear and controlled. The audience gasped softly as they followed her through the intricate rhythms and leaps. She had spent months practicing these passages, repeating them until they felt effortless. But even with the preparation, performing them live brought a new kind of challenge. Her heart raced, her mind focused intensely, but she let the music take over. Her fingers flew over the keys, precise and confident, turning the difficult passages into moments of beauty rather than fear. She could feel her connection to the music deepening with every measure. She wasn't thinking about the audience, the judges, or the applause anymore. She was inside the piece, living it, breathing it, becoming one with it. The melodies rose and fell, carrying the emotion she had imagined for so long. The dramatic moments were full of tension, the softer sections tender and delicate. She allowed herself to feel every note, to express the depth of the music through her fingers, her posture, and the subtle movements of her hands. For the first time, she realized that performing was not just about technique. It was about emotion, about communication, about connecting with people who were listening. She saw the reactions in the audience, smiles, nods, and wide eyes, and knew that her music was reaching them. She felt a thrill of joy, a rush of accomplishment, and a deep sense of fulfillment. Every hour of practice, every struggle, every late night had led to this moment of connection. As she approached the final section of the piece, her fingers moved even more confidently. The notes flowed like a river, smooth and expressive, yet precise and controlled. She had never felt so alive at the piano. The culmination of the music was approaching, and she played with both power and delicacy, letting every chord resonate, every pause have meaning. The audience was completely silent, hanging on to each note, completely absorbed in the performance. When she played the final chord, there was a brief moment of silence, as if the hall itself was holding its breath. Then the applause erupted. It was loud, genuine, and overwhelming. The sound filled the hall, echoing off the walls and rising to the ceiling. People were clapping, cheering, and some were even standing. She felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and pride washing over her. She had done it. She had not only played the piece, she had made it her own, and the audience had felt it. She stood and bowed, her heart racing, trying to take in the overwhelming response. Her parents were in the audience, clapping and smiling, their eyes shining with pride. The judges nodded in appreciation, impressed by her skill, her confidence, and the emotion she had brought to the performance. She had faced the hardest challenge she had ever known, and she had conquered it. But more than that, she had shared her music, her passion, and her story with the world, and it had been received with admiration and respect. Backstage, she was surrounded by congratulations, hugs, and smiles. Other musicians and audience members praised her performance, saying they had never heard anything like it. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not just from the recognition, but from knowing that she had pushed herself beyond her limits and succeeded. She had turned fear into strength, preparation into mastery, and passion into art. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. She remembered the old piano in her small living room, the hours of practice, the mistakes, and the small victories that had built her confidence. She thought about her parents' support, the encouragement from neighbors, and the quiet determination that had driven her forward. She realized that all of these elements, combined with her love for music, had brought her to this stage and made her performance possible. She also understood that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more stages, and more opportunities to grow as a musician, but now she knew that she could face them. She had discovered the power of persistence, courage, and self-belief. She had learned that fear could be transformed into focus, that obstacles could be overcome with dedication, and that music had the power to connect people in ways words could not. For the first time, she felt a sense of true confidence, not arrogance, but quiet assurance in her abilities and in her journey. She knew that no matter what happened next, she had proven something important to herself. That talent, when combined with hard work, determination, and passion, could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The applause, the praise, and the recognition were wonderful. But the real triumph was the journey itself, the growth, the courage, and the love for the music that had carried her to this moment. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep that night, she imagined future stages, new pieces, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. She knew that she had been made for challenges and that every difficult note, every demanding passage was an opportunity to show the world, and herself, what she could do. Her performance had left the audience breathless, but it had also left her filled with hope, determination, and an unwavering belief in the power of music. After the performance, her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The applause and praise were still fresh in her mind, and the memory of that stage made her heart race with pride. But now came a new challenge, learning to navigate the attention and recognition that her talent had brought her. She had always been focused on the music itself, not the audience or the fame, but suddenly, people everywhere wanted to see her play, to hear her story, and to celebrate her gift. The weeks following the showcase were a whirlwind of invitations, messages, and new opportunities. Schools and music clubs wanted her to perform. Local newspapers wrote small articles about the girl who had amazed audiences, and neighbors who had once simply watched from the fence now spoke of her with admiration. For her, it was overwhelming at first. She had spent so much time focused on practicing, improving, and mastering the piano that she had never thought about attention or recognition. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, to be celebrated so openly. Her parents were her anchor. They helped her manage the new attention, reminding her to stay grounded and focused on what really mattered, the music. "Enjoy it, but don't let it change you," her mother said one evening as they sat together in the living room after another performance. Her father nodded, adding, "Remember why you started and let that guide you." Their words reminded her that the journey was more important than any applause or recognition. The love for music that had driven her from the beginning was still her true reason for playing. She continued to practice daily, though now her schedule was busier than ever. Each performance, each audience, each new challenge became a lesson. She learned to control her nerves, to focus under pressure, and to bring emotion and story into every piece she played. The technical skills she had developed through months of solitary practice became a foundation, allowing her to explore more complex compositions, experiment with interpretation, and grow as an artist. Every day brought new growth, new understanding, and new joy. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a prestigious event in the city. It was a much larger stage, attended by professional musicians, critics, and music enthusiasts from all over. The pressure was immense. She had faced challenges before, but this felt different. The audience was not just curious neighbors or local judges. It was a room full of experienced musicians and serious critics. For a moment, she doubted herself, wondering if she was ready for such an important opportunity. But then she remembered everything she had already accomplished. She had faced fear before and turned it into strength, and she could do it again. She spent weeks preparing for the event. The piece she would play was challenging, even more demanding than any she had attempted before. She worked on precision, timing, and expression, making sure each section flowed seamlessly. She practiced not just her fingers, but her posture, her breathing, and her connection with the music. Each note had to convey the story. Each pause had to carry meaning. Her dedication was intense, but she felt alive in a way she never had before. Music had become more than practice. It was her life, her passion, and her voice. The day of the prestigious performance arrived. She woke early, her heart pounding, a mix of nerves and excitement coursing through her. She dressed simply but with care, choosing an outfit that made her feel confident. Her parents offered quiet words of encouragement and reminded her to enjoy the moment. "Trust yourself," her father said, holding her hand briefly. "The music will guide you." She nodded, feeling the weight of their support and love. She knew that no matter what happened, she had the strength to face the stage. When they arrived at the venue, she was struck by its grandeur. The hall was massive, with seats stretching far back, chandeliers glinting overhead, and a polished grand piano waiting on the stage. The audience was already filling in, their faces serious and expectant. She felt a flicker of fear, imagining mistakes or faltering fingers. But then she took a deep breath, remembering every challenge she had overcome. She thought about her first piano, the small living room, and the countless hours of practice. She realized that the music was bigger than any fear, bigger than any audience. Backstage, she saw other performers preparing. They were older, more experienced, and confident. Some had teachers adjusting their notes. Others practiced last-minute pieces with precision. She felt a brief pang of doubt. Could she match their skill? Could she hold her own on this stage? But she reminded herself that her journey was unique. She had learned discipline, courage, and passion through her own determination. No one could take that away. She took a deep breath and focused on the music. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The audience fell silent, a heavy quiet that made her heartbeat echo in her ears. She approached the piano, sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the music flow into her mind. She thought of all the struggles she had faced, the long nights of practice, the mistakes she had overcome, and the joy she had found in playing. Every step had led to this moment. The first notes rang out clearly, precise and full of emotion. She played with confidence, letting her fingers move naturally across the keys. The difficult sections, which had once seemed impossible, now felt like extensions of herself. She was not just performing, she was telling a story. Every note carried her heart, every chord reflected her journey, and every melody conveyed the determination and passion that had brought her here. The audience leaned forward, captivated by her skill and emotion. As the piece progressed, the complexity increased, and her fingers flew across the keys with speed and accuracy. Yet she never lost control. Each note was deliberate, each passage carefully executed, and each pause meaningful. She felt the music in her body, in her mind, and in her heart. She was fully present, fully alive in the moment. The audience could sense it. Their faces reflected awe, surprise, and admiration. They were not just listening, they were experiencing the story she was telling through her music. The judges watched intently, noting her technique, expression, and command of the piano. She could feel their scrutiny, but it no longer frightened her. She had faced pressure before and had thrived. Now she let the music guide her, trusting her hands, her heart, and her years of preparation. The emotional passages came naturally. The technical challenges were met with precision. And the overall performance had a flow and depth that captivated everyone in the room. By the final section, she was playing with confidence, power, and delicacy. Each chord resonated clearly. Each passage flowed seamlessly, and each note carried meaning. The audience was silent, fully absorbed, their eyes fixed on her. She played the final chord with strength and grace, letting it linger in the air. Then, for a brief moment, there was silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if trying to grasp the full impact of what they had just heard. Then the applause erupted. It started softly, then grew louder until the entire hall was filled with cheers, claps, and shouts of admiration. People were standing, clapping for her, some with tears in their eyes. She stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. Her parents rushed forward, embracing her with pride and joy. She had done it. She had faced the most difficult challenge of her life and triumphed. She had shared her music, her heart, and her story, and it had left the audience breathless. In the days that followed, the recognition grew. Music schools, local organizations, and even distant communities reached out to hear her play, to support her, and to celebrate her talent. She was invited to perform at concerts, festivals, and events, and she began to understand the wider impact of her music. She realized that her journey was not just about personal achievement. It was about inspiring others, showing that dedication, courage, and passion could overcome even the greatest challenges. Through it all, she remained grounded. She continued to practice daily, refining her technique, exploring new pieces, and connecting with the music in deeper ways. She never lost sight of why she had started: to express herself, to tell stories through music, and to find joy in the notes she created. The fame and recognition were wonderful, but they were secondary to the love she had for the art itself. She had learned that true success came not from applause but from persistence, courage, and the joy of creating something beautiful. Her parents watched her growth with pride, knowing that the small living room with the old piano had led to stages far beyond their town. They saw the transformation in their daughter, the confidence, the maturity, the discipline, and the deep understanding of music. They knew that the journey was far from over, but they also knew that she was ready for whatever challenges came next. She had learned how to face fear, how to persevere, and how to embrace her own talent with humility and determination. Looking back, she realized how far she had come. From the small living room where she had first touched the piano, to local competitions, to grand stages in cities filled with music lovers, her journey had been filled with struggle, triumph, and growth. She had faced impossible challenges, learned from every mistake, and discovered the depth of her own courage. And through it all, she had never lost the love for music that had started it all. Her story became an inspiration to many. People admired not just her talent, but her persistence.